Okay, those are two New York vendors. Hello everyone, I'm Jerry Punch from ESPN and ABC, and I'm thrilled to be back here this year to be able to be an MC for what is a very, very special night. The IMRRC Award Dinner offering, honoring one of the all-time greats in motorsports, and that is the King, Richard Petty. Just out of curiosity, how many of you were here a year ago when we had the inaugural award and we honored the Chip Ganassi? I see a show of hands. Wonderful, that's fabulous. Well, we had a good time that night, didn't we? We had a great time. We had a lot of fun. We told some stories. Said some things we probably shouldn't have said, but we laughed, and it was fabulous to have Chip Ganassi be the inaugural honoree and all that he's been involved with. And you will hear from him again tonight. He's here tonight to talk about honoring Richard Petty. And at the end of the night, we raised some very valuable funds for an amazing museum and program. So as we get started tonight, we will have, I will tell you that as the evening progresses, we will be hearing from several drivers, some legends, some Hall of Famers that will be talking about their stories and their history and telling some things maybe they haven't told before about Richard Petty, and you'll also have some special guests coming up a little later on. So to get the evening started, let's introduce you to the International Motor Racing Research Center.
It was 1948 in this small upstate New York town that modern American road racing was born. The brainchild of an ambitious young lawyer and car enthusiast, Cameron Argensinger.
My father had an MG, and he read about the great races in Europe, and he wanted to recreate a race of that type here in Watkins Glen. And he persuaded the village fathers. Here's this young man, 27 years old, with an MG, who sold him on this crazy idea. Let's have a race right down the main street, past the courthouse, up the hill, around the gorge, and amazingly, 10,000 people showed up. And it was an immediate success. And they planned for the next year, and there was something like 50,000 people who showed up. But crowd control became very difficult. There were private owners who owned the land, and we really could not keep people back away from the road. In 1956, the present road track was built, and it was modeled on a European race course. And in 1961, the FIA awarded Watkins Glen the U.S. Grand Prix, and it ran here for 20 years.
Today, the Glen is the home of NASCAR's premier road race.
People used to say to my father, well, you weren't a NASCAR fellow. Aren't you sorry that sports cars are not the premier? And he said, nonsense. I'm so proud that NASCAR has now made it one of their premier races. And I think the NASCAR drivers like the road track.
Along the way, the local public library began to assemble a treasure trove of motorsports archives, photographs, and memorabilia. The problem, where to keep it all, and how to make it accessible to the public.
John Bishop, who had founded IMSA, was concerned that a lot of the racing material that had been created over the years was being lost. People were throwing it away. So in 1998, which was the 50th anniversary of road racing in Watkins Glen, a number of people in the racing community, including the Collier family and John Bishop, got together and built the building we're in right now, which is about 5,500 square foot purpose-built library. See, there are a lot of museums, car museums around the country, but we're unique. We really have the philosophy of the library. But unlike librarians that make you shh, we let people come in and they can have hands-on. We have material from all over the world. We last year got an extensive collection from Germany, a lot on the Nürburgring. We also have extensive collections on Indianapolis and stock car racing. We have original letters signed by Tazio Villari, for example, which are fun for people to see. Sometimes sometimes we get racing gloves from Foncho. And those are little mementos we keep in addition to the actual serious archives. And this Motor Racing Research Center, we hope to be the Cooperstown of motor racing with all of the items we have here.
Those of you who have not had a chance to visit that amazing facility, it is filled with so many one-of-a-kind documents, memorabilia, articles from racing around the world. It is something that you owe it to yourself. If you like motorsports or even a casual fan to go by and pick up some of those documents and books and read, you will be absolutely amazed at what it holds. It is my pleasure right now to welcome the president of the International Motor Racing Research Center, J.C. Artisan.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. Seeing that little tape that I just did, it took my entire speech. That was everything I was going to tell you. But when we got started some 18 years ago, we did want to become the Cooperstown of racing. And over those last 18 years, we have received thousands and thousands of documents, contributions. Public has supported us. And I think we are, if not the Cooperstown of racing, we are so well on our way. We've run for the last 18 years with no debt. We have a little endowment, which is nice. We've got a great staff, and we've got a great board of directors who are here. Bobby Rahal, I believe, is here, and he's our chairman. But we are absolutely thrilled to be honoring Richard Petty. Now, when you say the word icon, it's redundant. That's Richard Petty. And his son Kyle is here. And you know, they are the first family of American racing. And Richard, of course, is the face of American racing to most Americans. That's what they think about. His family, as I've said, is the first family. And on a personal note, I can remember so well his father, Lee. NASCAR and Watkins Glen go back a long ways. Bill France was here in 1948 when my father started that first race. And he and my father teamed up in 1957 and had a stock car race on the road track. And Lee was there. And I think Lee's last race was 1964 at Watkins Glen. And Richard and Lee were both there. So we are proud of our role of preserving the history of racing. Stock cars, Formula One, oval track, dirt track. We've got a lot of people who are interested in dirt track. We even have motorcycle material. We really are universal in our appeal. And we have thousands of people who come by to see us. Now we're open to the public, it's unique, free of charge. We have casual fans who want to look at the artifacts, maybe want to see if their grandfather raced at Le Mans. We've got material from Laguna Seca to Le Mans. People call up and say, what's the fastest lap at Charlotte, and what year was it? We have all of those records. In the wintertime, we even have researchers who come in as far away from as Australia and Japan. And it's been good for the community, but it's been good for the racing community. Now, as I say, we are a 501c3. It's people like you who have supported us. We really don't have any major corporate or governmental funding, not that we wouldn't want that, but it has been amazing over 18 years. People send in their $25 or their $2,500 as sponsors. They also send in their books, Grandpa's collections. And speaking of collections, we've got a number of major collections. We have the RRDC collection. We have the early IMSA archives. And that's what we are, is an archive, a library, a research library. And this year, I'm delighted that CCA is with us. A couple of months ago, we got 2 tractor loads of the 70 years of the Sports Car Club of America archives, which is really wonderful. And we do have a close relationship with the public library. As Carol Franzese, the president here, Carol, we want to thank you for all of your help. It really did start out as a shock at the public library. And they've been very, very, very helpful. So we do want to thank the library. And of course, we do have a wonderful board. But I do want to thank our sponsors tonight. And Corning Inc. and Corning Foundation, the very place we are. Many of you know that Corning in the 1980s rescued Watkins Glen, and they entered a partnership with ISC, and they are a reason that Watkins Glen still exists today, and they're our sponsor tonight. Along with NASCAR, we're delighted to be sponsorship from NASCAR, ISC, WGI, and Smithfield Foods is a wonderful sponsor here tonight. Also, I mentioned we have a number of council members, but chief among those, Larry Kessler, who is the chairman of this wonderful dinner. We wouldn't be having this. Larry, would you stand up, please? Thanks so much, Larry. Larry was really the main drive behind this, and we couldn't do it without you. Larry is here at the table with Archie Urchioli and Bob Newman, who are sponsors. We have Welliver Incorporated, Scott Welliver is here. We have the SCCA, John, there's John, at the SCCA table, thank you, as another prime sponsor. The IMRRC Savings Bank, now where are they? Please raise your hand. Thank you very much. And Chip Ganassi Racing. Chip, thank you so much for coming back. I want to thank all of you for your support over the years of the International Motor Racing Research Center, and please stop by and see us in Watkins Glen. We're open every day but Sunday.
Thank you very much, JC. While he makes his way back to his table, I'm going to tell you, we all know Richard Petty as an icon in North America and in motorsports. But I will tell you, a few years ago, I went to a football game in Tokyo, college all-star game, and the night before the game, Sports Center sent me to the dojo of the grand sumo champion in Tokyo, who spoke no English. Akibono was his name. He was 6'8", 635 pounds, and he was the grand sumo champion. And I was to do a cut-in for Sports Center, and his interpreter asked me what I did besides college football, and I said, well, I'm very proud to do NASCAR racing. This was about 12 years ago, and I just happened to, he shook his head, and I happened to have a magazine in my briefcase, and I held the magazine up, opened it up, and I had a picture of the 43 car, the STP car. And I held it up, and here's this grand champion who speaks no English, looks at the car and looks back and says, Richard Petty. So he's an international icon as well. And now for tonight's invocation, it is my pleasure to welcome back again the Reverend Michael Hartney. Reverend?
No prayer this evening could be said until it is acknowledged that two sons of Cameron and Jean Arkensinger have died since this dinner in 2014. Sam, who came back to the Finger Lakes to cultivate the family farm and vineyards, and was said to have been larger than life. And Michael, competitive driver and renowned author. He was here last year. Our sympathy and condolences go out to their mother, Jean, and the surviving members of the Arkensinger family. May they rest in peace. So tonight we gather again to commemorate the legacy and vision of Cameron Arkensinger, who managed 68 years ago to convince the rural upstate village of Watkins Glen, New York, to host in 1948 the first post-war road racing event on public streets, state highways, and state park roads. Drivers and car owners from around the world came to Watkins Glen, and it led to the creation of what is now Watkins Glen International. Along the way, our honoree tonight made his way from North Carolina to this place, bringing along old 43 in Petty Blue and STP Red, where thankfully he came. The racing community has long ago honored him as the king, and though I worked for another king, I'm impressed. It may not be the feeding of the 5,000, but the presence of the king passing out Smithfield hams from the back of a semi-truck at every NASCAR event surely qualifies. We are thankful for your example of generosity. We cannot gather tonight either without remembering those serving in the armed forces in dangerous places, the poor and the hungry who need our generosity, and those who strive for a better life for themselves and their families. We're thankful for their courage and steadfastness. We're mindful that we also gather tonight in a time of recent racial and ethnic tragedies. These tragic events remind us that we are in great danger by the unhappy divisions and prejudices that infect our country. We pray for an end of hatred and prejudice. But most importantly tonight, we're thankful that Richard Petty, the voice of Strip Weathers, the Piston Cup Circuit champion, with Chick Hicks and Lightning McQueen, can be here tonight. It's a long way from Radiator Springs to Watkins Glen. You receive our thanks and honor. But the only way for me to conclude this prayer tonight is to don iconic eyewear. And with apologies to George Friedrich Handel and the Holy Scriptures. Hallelujah! For the Lord God omnipotent reigneth, the kingdom of this sport has become the kingdom of the King, and he shall reign forever and ever, King of kings and Lord of lords. And the people said, Amen.
Wonderful words as always, Reverend, and we would hope you would enjoy your dinner and enjoy the slideshow. As the King Richard would say, let them eat ham. those of you that are enjoying your dinner will continue to eat as we will get the program back underway. You know, I was asked, when you come to an event like this and you just had a wonderful meal, first of all, how about a nice round of applause for our servers and the meals tonight. Sometimes after you eat a meal like this, and you get nice and full, it's starting to get late, maybe you've had a glass of wine or two or more, you may get a little drowsy. So I was asked if I would try to stir things up a little bit, if I could tell a fairly clean joke. And so here goes. And just noticing what we were eating out on the table, I thought I would mention there were two 85-year-old men who were having coffee at their favorite spot here in downtown Watkins Glen, and sitting outside having a cup of coffee on a beautiful morning. And one gentleman looks at the other and says, you know what, since I'm 85, you're 85. He said, you know, but you walk straight up, you don't stoop over, you're spry in your step, you still walk with, and I'm all stooped over and I can barely move and shuffle. What is your secret? And the other 85-year-old said, well, it's simple, it's rye bread. He said, I eat a lot of rye bread and rye rolls. And he said, you know, it not only helps me my energy, I can walk, I can stand straight up, and it really helps my virility. Rye bread is the difference. So the man who's struggling gets up and has a coffee, so I'll be back in a little bit. So he goes down the street here in Watkins, the bakery, walks in the bakery, and he says, ma'am, says, I'd like to buy 5 loaves of rye bread. And she said, 5 loaves of rye bread, sir? Are you serious? I want 5 loaves of rye bread. And she looks and swears, and I said, I hope you understand that by the time you open that 3rd loaf, it's going to start to get hard. He said, everybody knew that. Anyway. Now that you're awake, it's time. Everybody here tonight is a VIP. Everyone is a very important person. We have some special guests I would like to introduce, and if you would please stand and wave and acknowledge when I introduce you. It's our pleasure tonight to have these folks. NASCAR Vice Chairman with us, Mike Helton. Mike, where are you? A driver in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series and also the great-grandson of NASCAR founder Bill France Sr., Ben Kennedy. Ben? The Motorsports Marketing Manager for Ford, Tim Dewar. Where are you, Tim? NASCAR Racing Supervisor for Ford Motor Company, Pat Morgan. The President of International Speedway Corporation, John Saunders. John? And the President of Watkins Glen International, Michael Prenta. Michael? The CEO of Richard Petty Motorsports, Brian Moffitt. President of the SCCA, Lisa Noble. Where are you, Lisa? A famed former Can-Am racer, Oscar Kowaleski. And I think I saw the president of Martinsville Speedway, and of course the great-grandson of the legendary Clay Earls, Clay Campbell is here. Where are you, Clay? And if we missed some others, I'm sure there are others here who are going to be up speaking later, so I'll leave those off our list. We'll have them come up and say a few words later on. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you the Vice President of Corporate Marketing for Smithfield Foods. Please welcome Bob Weber.
Okay, now a word from our sponsor. Let me first start off by congratulating Fred and Bobby Rahal on their win this weekend in Ohio. Great job. And Fred was thrown away from everybody. It was really impressive the last few runs. So, I'm going to get a little inside baseball because we don't make tires, motor oil, or cars. We make pork. By the way, you're eating a pork loin tonight, cleverly disguised as a piece of beef. But we're involved in motorsports now, and I thought there's going to be a lot of people tonight that are going to talk about Richard and his accomplishments in motorsports. I thought I'd give you a little insight on a different side of Richard and how this all came together, because not too often you get a chance to understand how a sponsor gets involved in motorsports and how we make it work. So I think it's interesting to everybody here. It started off with me sitting across the desk from the CEO of our company, Larry Pope. And Larry looked at me and he said, I like NASCAR, and I love Richard Petty, but I'm in it for the money. Well, I mean, there's no more direct words as a marketing guy who's about to take you into motorsports sponsorship at the level that we were going at than something as daunting as Larry's challenge to turn this into money. But it was a very special thing. But that was 4 years ago, and in the course of 4 years, we had increased our investment in Smithfield Foods with Richard Petty Motorsports by a factor of 8, and there's a 9th increase looming. Right, Brian? Yes, we're talking about it. We're still talking about it, not done yet. So the interesting thing was, I'm very much a logical reason guy, so it was all about connecting the dots. So we wanted to go back and understand the sport that we were about to get involved in. We kind of knew what the NASCAR fan was all about. We knew they were our customer, but we wanted to go back and validate why we're here. So when we went back through the process, you start off with consumption. There's people actually buying your product. And what we found out is that in protein, we all eat protein, right? So finding disproportionate consumption patterns is really hard to find. But when we laid NASCAR FanDuel on top of it, whether it was in arena at the track or watching television, the indices went off the chart for ham, bacon, pork, sausage, you name it, every single category. And I very affectionately, I hope I'm not offending anybody here, but we discovered that Bubba really likes pork. The other thing was that there were 80 million of these people out there. Engaged fans, 80 million of them. When we went back and looked at the consumer spending, they control 27% of all the spending in the United States. So they eat a lot of pork, there's 80 million of them, they control all the spending. When we look at local market television ratings in the places that we do business, people are watching NASCAR racing at almost a level of 3 times the national average where we conduct our business. Eat a lot of pork, a lot of people. They control a lot of spending, and they're all in the right places. But the last thing, and Mike will probably tell you this, that NASCAR has done a brilliant job, this is really a message to everybody else in the sanctioned bodies of motorsports, is they've convinced the fan that our presence in the sport is really important to it ongoing, that they need to buy our products. And we make an everyday product. You can walk into any grocery store and buy it. In fact, you can eat our product 3 times a day. And so with that, it was important for us, and what we found out, and Mike will tell you, 1 out of every 2 fans will always buy a product from a fan, from a sponsor of the sport. So you put all those pieces together, and it was very clear to us, with that in pocket, achieving Larry's goal of delivering money was a pretty easy task. It was just a matter of execution. So why Richard Petty in the 43? And at that matter, and you saw outside, why Petty Blue? When our colors, if you think about our brand colors, the food, they're black and white, really, very inspiring. And our brand managers, when we first got into the sport, if you saw our car the first year, they were working with us trying to get their colors onto the car. And our CEO said, Bob, why are we not painting this car Petty Blue? And I go, that's really a good question, because frankly, Richard's brand, we could spend hundreds of millions of dollars and never once approach the kind of presence that Richard Petty has in consumers' hearts. So why fight it? Let's get on board in our car since it has been Petty Blue, and it's a great connection for us. And if you think about Smithfield, and I'm a kid who grew up in New York City, so I'm familiar with Smithfield from hams, right? We all had a ham during Christmas. But it's a very authentic brand, and so when we went in, our strategy was to get involved with a very authentic brand in NASCAR. And there is no more authentic brand than Richard Petty, arguably the foundation of this sport. It's the building block on which it's been. In fact, Babe Ruth is still playing baseball. He's still engaged, and he's still here. So, but we're here to celebrate the career of arguably one of the greatest drivers in all of motorsports. But there's another side of Richard that you really don't know about, and it's overshadowed by his racing exploits. And that's the fact that he's one really savvy marketer. Recall Larry's challenge that I had to turn this into money. And really was his way of saying is, how do you get involved in a sport like this and leverage our presence to turn it into sales, to get consumers to believe in our brand through our association with Richard and Richard Petty Motorsports. And so that challenge in our meeting, our conference room, Larry threw that to Richard, and Richard turned around to him, looked and said, Larry, I guarantee you that I can sell you a product for you the first time. But the quality of your product determines the second sale. And that was simple and absolutely brilliant. And I said, this is a really good marketing guy. So today in marketing, the whole convention is all about, we all talk about branding, right? We at Smithfield Foods are very much involved in that. We've always been a commodity marketer. We sold pork. Well, now for the last years that Larry's been our CEO, it's all about us transitioning to be a packaged goods company, about our brand. And it's been working absolutely amazing, and part of that, the biggest part of that has been our investment in NASCAR. But if you think about, go back to 1981, the definitive marketing book back then was written by, and I studied this in school, a guy named Al Reese and Jack Trout wrote this book called Positioning, The Battle for the Consumer's Mind. It is the most important marketing book ever written, 1981. Well, in 1979, 2 years before that book was published, Richard Petty adopted his Charlie one-horse cowboy hat as a dodge against wearing the wrong sponsor's hat during interviews. And whether by knowingly or by chance, he created his brand. And to this very day, if you think about it, it remains one of the most recognized and powerful brands in all the annals of marketing. And I can top Jerry's story about Sumo Racer. A year and a half ago, we were in New York. We were debating on how we would announce our 3-year extension of Richard Petty Motorsports. And our people were lobbying for a restaurant in Charlotte. And I said, no, wait, we're going to do this in New York. We rented a Broadway theater, and we announced our extension. And the night before, we did a dinner in my favorite Italian restaurant. Anybody from New York was the Patsy's on West 56th Street. So we're talking upper west side of New York, West 56th Street, on Monday night, an Italian restaurant. We had the second floor. It took Richard 20 minutes to get from the front door upstairs on a Monday night in New York. That's the power of Richard's brand. So, and the thing that was also compelling to us to this very day, Nielsen does something called N scores, where they rate celebrities and their status and standing. Richard remains to this very day the single highest, most recognized motorsports driver of all time, to this very day. And the most trusted, which is an important part for us. And don't forget, this guy hasn't driven a car in 23 years. So the question is really, is our sponsorship of Aragon the 43 and Richard Petty Motorsports delivered for our company and brands? Well, better expressed for those involved and those engaged in motorsports, can our sport connect the dots and actually motivate consumers to buy our products and keep us engaged and sponsoring? So, in other words, the answer is yes. One of the earliest retail partnerships that we formed was at the epicenter of NASCAR fandom, Buffalo, New York. Yes, it is. And Jim Lane is with us tonight from Topps Market at my table. And Jim got on board with us and deployed Richard Petty's standees in the meat aisle. Don't forget, these people got all for it. And Jim doubled sales in a promotional period year over year, 100% increase in sales, because Richard was standing in the meat aisle at Topps Market. And we've never looked back, we keep going forward. Goodness knows how hot bacon is these days, right? Heck, Eric's powered by it, so is his race car. But don't forget, we're talking about a very mature marketplace. If you think about bacon goes back to the 1600s. Incredibly mature marketplace. As recent as 15 years ago, the margins, the profit we made on bacon was so low that it was one of the last things we wanted to sell. Today, it is absolutely extraordinarily hot. In fact, the category of bacon consumption last year increased, think about this, the mature marketplace increased 5%. The whole category of bacon sales went up 5%. I have to tell you, Smithfield bacon sales went up 35% in that period of time. Talk about food by bacon, right? So, with that, Richard, that savvy marketer, that brand innovator, that iconic racer, was right. He could sell our product for us the first time. We proved it time and time again. And I even extend my hand out to Mike's team. If ever you want to have me as somebody to help me make a sale, I'm here because we believe in NASCAR. It absolutely works for it if you do it the right way. I don't know if any of you had a chance. One of the things that we do it the right way is we created a documentary film this year called Chasing 43 that was featured on NBC Sports. If you hadn't had a chance to see it, you should drop me a note and I'll send you a DVD of it. But it was us about, not about art, it wasn't us waving pork rinds in front of people. It was talking about our involvement in the sport and how well it's worked for us. And so if you have a chance to see it, it's really terrific. So on behalf of the 46,000 employees at Smithfield Foods, thank you for allowing us to be part of your very special career, Richard. And our heartiest congratulations on receiving the Cameron our guest here, outstanding contribution to motorsports. Congratulations, Richard.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you for Smithfield's involvement in this event tonight, and of course your sponsorship of Richard Petty Motorsports and what you are doing for the sport of NASCAR stock car racing. We told you about last year. We had a great time here. We had a wonderful night and an incredible honoree. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this time it's my pleasure to welcome back the inaugural recipient of the Cameron R. Argensinger Award, multi-team owner in many racing series, a former driver himself, and a great friend. Please welcome Chip Ganassi.
That was a great speech, Bob. Who knew bacon went back to the 1600s? Just a joke. Good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome everyone and thank you all for being here. What a great opportunity to allow me to come up here and honor such a legend. In fact, I've never actually had the honor of, the luxury of honoring royalty, and so this is the first for me, I can tell you. Last year, the International Racing Research Center, as you heard, gave me the first Argensinger Award, and I thought it was a huge honor. I can tell you this, I don't think most people follow their passions with the expectation of being honored. They do it because they love it. And frankly, because it doesn't feel like work. That's what we do in racing, and that's why I went into racing. I love it. And I loved everything about it, the sounds, the cars, the smells, the characters, but most of all the competition. And I still do, just as I did when I was a kid racing go-karts in Western Pennsylvania. Not only did I not get into racing for the praise, in fact, these type of recognitions never even entered my mind. Last year I was both humbled and proud to be the first recipient of the Argensinger Award. But this year's honoree actually tops last year's honoree, I think. And as I get to talk about one of my racing heroes, for that matter, he's everybody's racing hero, I think. People don't get a nickname like the King for just any reason, I can tell you, you know. He's won more races than most drivers have ever started. Think about that. He and his petty blue number 43 are both sports icons. They just go together, which you've heard. Every bit as much as Mickey Mantle and Pinstripes, or Mean Joe Green and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Overall, he's won, as you heard, an untouchable 200 races, 27 of which came in 1967 alone. Think about that. Amarillo and San Juan show, you have to win every race for 5 years in a row just to get to that number. Every single race for 5.5 years just to get there. But his accomplishments don't stop there. He won the Daytona 500 7 times and 7 NASCAR championships. I guess that's why they call him the King. And this man, Richard is a legend's legend, ladies and gentlemen. And I had the opportunity, as you see over there, the King has his court. His court's over there at the next table. And I want a guy over there to stand up a guy I get to see every weekend at the racetrack, probably we call Richard the King. This guy's probably the Duke, I guess. Dale Inman. Dale, stand up and let the people see who you are. I was telling Dale at Pope, I said, hey, you might get to introduce the King or get to speak about him at the Artist Singer Award next week. I said, I was just thinking, how do you introduce him that won top 200 races? He's a chip. He said, let me tell you something. He said, King Richard always said to me, he won 400 races if he didn't have me. I thought that was pretty good to be able to have him like that. Anyway, lastly, I'm going to say this. It's one of the highlights of my racing career to be able to call the King, Richard Petty, my friend. Thanks for having me, Petty.
Thank you very much, well said. I do want to mention that while we were having dinner, there were a number of slides and pictures being looped on the screens around the room. And we want to do our thanks, give thanks to photographer Adrian Ketchum, who is here tonight, the folks from National Speed Sport News with their amazing collection, and Richard Petty Motorsports for providing these slides. And how about a nice round of applause, some incredible slides.